everyone, and welcome to our modded playthrough of Kerbal Space Program. In today's episode we will be sending a trio of probes to Minmus to fulfill some contract obligations and earn some much needed science points as well. I decided not to record the first few missions of this career playthrough, as they were just the usual fare of launching small rockets, satellites, and unlocking the early parts of the tech tree. All of which is pretty boring and not really worth the time in video editing, but I will explain what I've done so far. The first few launches were science and relay missions to the moon. These were all unmanned probes, and we are using the Unmanned Before Man mod that changes the layout of the tech tree for this. Using the Strategia mod, I was able to pick up several contracts that required probes to be landed on the moon, and 2 ScanSats to be placed in polar orbits. These missions provided a good amount of science and funding for our fledgling space program, and the ScanSats allowed us to make accurate maps of the moon's biomes, which will come in handy for planning future missions. With the science earned from these missions, I took a very aggressive path in the tech tree to unlock the Rapier engines as quickly as possible. This also cost a lot of funds, almost 2 million, to fully upgrade the research facility so that we could research the engines, but it will be well worth it in the long run. The Rapier engines will allow us to build reusable SSTOs, which will greatly reduce the cost of launching probes and satellites to low Kerbal orbit, and then onwards towards the moon or Minmus as well. Unfortunately, this research has come at a price, and we are almost broke, which is why this mission to Minmus is so important. I'm sending up our first SSTO for this mission, and it will be unmanned to keep costs down. This is because in this playthrough I am also using the USI life support mods to add another layer of difficulty to the game, and I don't want to carry up the additional weight of kerbals plus all of the life support and equipment required for a trip to Minmus. That will be done in a later video. I've decided to name this SSTO the Skylark. It weighs approximately 14 tons and can take around 20 tons into Kerbal orbit, with enough delta V to also do a return trip to the orbits of the moon or Minmus. It has a very good thrust to weight ratio, and achievement orbit with this SSTO is no problem at all. In fact, it's probably one of the more stable SSTOs that I've made in recent months. Due to its relatively good cargo capacity and high thrust, the Skylark will probably be used for future contracts that require satellites to be placed in orbit above Kerbal and perhaps the moon as well. Once in orbit at Kerbal, it was time to plan our Minmus insertion burn. I decided not to do an insertion burn whilst in low Kerbal orbit to save delta V, and would be making a mid-course correction burn on the way to Minmus. I was not too worried about the accuracy of the insertion burn, as delta V required to correct our course would be very minimal. As we fell away from Kerbal, I thought it would be a good time to open up the cargo bay to check on the status of our 3 probes. They are very simple and compact, each one weighing just over 500 kilograms and with around 1400 meters a second of delta V, more than enough to land on Minmus. Our mid-course correction gives us a periapsis of 84 kilometers at the closest approach to Minmus, and also puts us on a free return trajectory to Kerbal as well. After time warping to Minmus, it is time to prepare the deployment of our 3 lander probes. The aim of this mission is to land them in 3 different biomes. The contract, plus bonuses given to our milestone achievements from Strategia, should net us around 500,000 credits and a decent amount of science points. Each probe has a basic solar array and a simple direct antenna. They carry a thermometer, barometer, and a seismic scanning unit to use on the surface of Minmus. Each probe is individually inserted into orbit, as they have more than enough delta V on their own to do so. I was planning on using the data from our scan satellite to determine the best landing spot, however the biome scan of Minmus was not yet complete, so I decided to eyeball it instead. As I was unsure of an initial landing area, I lowered the orbit of the first probe so that I could determine which biomes to land in. I decided to choose the lowlands as my first landing choice. The probe was very easy to land, in fact it was completely overpowered for the task of landing on Minmus, but it was better to be safe than sorry. With the leftover delta V, it could always be used to hop to a different biome if a later mission required it. The second probe would be landed in the Greater Flats region. I had to do a few quick course corrections to get it on target, but that was no problem at all. It made a flawless touchdown, and I immediately set to work collecting the science data for this biome as well. The third probe was landed in the lowlands, and for a bit of an extra challenge I decided to try landing it on the side of a large hill. I think I did pretty well, and once again all available science data was collected and beamed back to Kerbal. The mission was going exactly to plan so far. Unfortunately, this is where our luck began to run out, as you will now see. I had forgotten that without updating the tracking station I had no way to tell my exact re-entry trajectory, which would make a targeted landing at the KSC very difficult. On top of that, my lackluster and slightly explosive aerobraking maneuver had left me in a very inclined orbit. I tried my best to align my final re-entry as close to the KSC as possible, but it became very clear that I was going to overshoot my target by a long way. The final re-entry was not as graceful as I had hoped, and there was a real moment of panic when the craft found itself stuck in a flat spin. Eventually I was able to power out of the spin and begin my landing approach on an unexplored area of land. I was very lucky that the re-entry hadn't left me flying over the middle of an ocean. The descent was smooth and steady, and I was very confident in my ability to land the Skylark. Sadly, this was not to be. The low lighting made it very difficult to judge the true altitude of the craft, and I came down far too hard. Technically the probe core survived, but the rest of the Skylark was lost. I was tempted to reload the save and try landing again, but I decided not to do that. This failure would serve as a reminder for myself to be more gentle with landings in the future, and in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't a huge financial hit to lose the craft. Aside from the crash, the mission was a complete success. We ended up with almost 700 science points, and we now had 800,000 funds in the bank. This will allow us to move on to the next phase of our space program, which will be sending a crew of kerbals to the moon to conduct a more in-depth series of science experiments. That brings today's video to a close. I hope you all enjoyed it and found it a bit interesting. Make sure to tune in next time as we build an advanced ship with life support systems to take our kerbals on their first trip to the moon. Thank you very much for watching. This is T-Rex signing off.